Alright, in this lesson we'll find derivatives of trig functions, and again the derivative is the slope of a tangent line. So let's look at some slopes of sine. Here's y equals sine x, and we know that the slope of this line is 0, the slope of that line is 0, and so at pi over 2 the slope is 0. At 3 pi over 2 the slope is 0. Here we're making a table with values of the derivative, and then we'll graph the values of the derivative and see the shape of the derivative function. So now let's just estimate some slopes here. We have a slope, a tangent line there, and a tangent line there, and a tangent line there. If we had graph paper and we could estimate pretty accurately that the slope of this line is 1. Well, if that's a 1 and this is symmetric, then this must be a slope of -1, and then a slope of +1. So now let's plot these points and see what function this might be at 0, 1. Pi over 2 we go to 0. Pi we go to -1, 0, 1. So now we have this graph, and that graph is cosine. So if this is sine, its derivative is cosine. Let's see what the derivative of cosine is. So this is cosine x, and we want to look for the values of the derivatives. Go ahead and pause the video, try that one on your own. Now we have 0 slopes at 0 and 2 pi, also at pi, and at pi over 2 that looks like it could be a -1. At 3 pi over 2, +1. So plotting these points, we have 0, 0, pi over 2, -1, pi 0, 3 pi over 2, +1, and then back down to 0. And we could describe this graph with different functions, like using translations. We could say that's sine that's shifted to the right, but instead the easier way to describe it would just be negative sine. So now we see that the derivative of cosine is negative sine. And then let's just look at the derivatives of the 6 trig functions. And you'll have to memorize these. If y equals sine x, we know that y prime is cosine x. If y equals cosine x, y prime is negative sine x. If y is tangent x, then y prime is secant squared. And if y is cotangent x, y prime is negative cosecant squared x. And if y is secant, then y prime is secant times tangent. If y is cosecant, y prime is negative cosecant cotangent. Alright, so let's see how these are. Look for a pattern. Instead of memorizing 6 things, we can just see that if you memorize the top 3 here, then all you do for the other ones is switch them around and make it negative. Secant goes to cosecant, secant tangent goes to cosecant cotangent, and then all of these have negatives. So we need to memorize these. To find the equation of a tangent line, you need the slope and point slope formula. The slope is the derivative. The derivative of sine is cosine, and then we'll evaluate that at pi. Cosine of pi is -1. And here we have y minus y1m, x minus x1. Y minus the y value of sine when x equals pi. Sine of pi is 0. Slope is -1. X is pi. So the equation is that. Okay, pause the video and try that one. The derivative of cosine is negative sine. The derivative at pi over 2, sine of pi over 2 is 1, and then we have a -1. Here we'll go y minus y equals m, x minus x. The x value is pi over 2. The slope is -1. And the y value of cosine at pi over 2 is 0. Alright, tangent line of tangent function at pi. Pause the video and try that one. The derivative of tangent is secant squared. And the derivative at pi is secant of pi squared. So let's remember how to evaluate that. And secant of pi, we'll need to look at pi is over there. Secant is r over x. The radius is 1. X is -1, so that is -1. And we'll have -1 squared. Y minus y equals m x minus x. We know the x value. We know the slope. We need the y value of tangent at pi. Tangent of pi. Tangent is y over x. The y value at pi is 0, and the x value is 1. So this is 0. And we get x minus pi. Alright, and pause the video and try that one. The slope is the derivative. The derivative of secant is secant times tangent. We need to find the slope at pi over 4. And secant of pi over 4. Secant is r over x, so that's r over x. Tangent is y over x, so that's 1. And we get radical 2. Y minus y equals m x minus x. The y value of secant at pi over 4, we see that right here is radical 2. And then we'll just add pi over 2. So we're going to get just add pi over, I said add pi over 2, we're going to add radical 2. Add radical 2 to both sides, and we could leave it like that, or you could factor out a radical 2. Alright, and we'll stop there.